I'd like to welcome you now to my full review of Mortal Shell. I'm just going to chat about it somewhat subjectively, talk to you like how I would just speak to a friend of mine.
Hey, hey, smoke weed every day.
And just tell you what I liked, what I didn't like so much.
And that's it.
I have a thing for opening sequences. Like stories or films, a game needs to set up a hook to draw in the player, get them invested. A common way of doing this is introducing questions. Pretty sure that's why beginning in prison is a bit of a cliche. What did I do to end up here? Who is responsible for jailing me? And then more urgently, of course,
We got to get out of here. The Americans, they're coming.
the hook for Mortal Shell, at least how I interpreted it, is who am I? And I don't mean that in the deep existential sense. I mean that in the sense of what kind of disgusting fleshy creature is this? Being birthed out of a tunnel system, emerging into a fossilized ribcage. It's kind of disturbing. It really grabbed my attention and gave me an early hint at the game's style. Dark game, kind of spooky. At least there were no ghosts in my shell. Anyways, the story of Mortal Shell is presented through cryptic inscriptions, strange NPCs, and the occasional rare cutscene. You emerge as a foundling in a twisted, torn world containing remnants of humanity that you can latch onto.
Suck.
We'll come back to that. And from the beginning, all you are really told is that you need to complete the task of gathering 3 sacred glands, yes, glands, and return them to the mysterious old prisoner. As I continue now with the positives and negatives, I'm going to try and not make the gaming journalist mistake of just handing you a sterile science report. This is going to be personal. The parts I liked, what I didn't like, and if you have a problem with that, meet me in Darkroot Basin.
It's just you and me.
1v1,
Skin on skin.
katanas only.
Stripped to the waist.
So, let's start with the negatives. You'll quickly realise I really liked this game, but did I like every single little thing about it?
No.
This is the very first area in the game. It's at the very centre of the Mortal Shell world. It's called Fulgrim. It's my least favourite area. It honestly would be fine if it wasn't for the fact some of the other locations in this game are god tier. I have to get this off my chest. The Eternal Narthex, the Dim Gate, and the Shifting Archives.
Are you recording?
These 3 areas alone are just mwah. Before that though, there's the Fulgrim Tower area, and it's just kind of boring in comparison. It's a labyrinth of swampy pathways that all look the same, populated with the weakest enemies in the game, both in terms of threat and design. And don't even get me started when the mist event takes place. All the tunnel entrances basically look identical. Look at these right now and tell me which one leads where. Go on.
I'm lost.
Look, I know for many people the lure of these types of games is the lack of handholding. No compass, no minimap, no quest markers. I understand and I completely agree, those things aren't necessary. But not being able to really identify which tunnels you have or haven't explored without going through them can get slightly annoying. So here's what I came up with, inspired by the candle system in Bloodborne Chalice Dungeons. I think the developers could have thought about giving the player more control over their exploration and allowing us to leave a physical marker to remind ourselves of which places we've explored already. This could be something simple like maybe planting flags, or even a baguette. Considering there's no climbing or jumping, really it's impressive that they managed to include pseudo-platforming or something close to that. The level verticality which allows this is most prevalent in the Obsidian Temple area, and most of the time it's fun. However, I would say the game struggles with being consistent with where it allows you to go. Sometimes you're rewarded for taking a brave leap of faith, and then other times you just fall into a kill box. Was this overly frustrating? It wasn't too bad. Getting stuck on level geometry probably ties into this as well. I'm not too bothered by stuff like that. At the end of the day, it's up to you how much that bothers you or not. Couple more negative things before we reach the positive. The enemy tracking in this game is sometimes absolute bunkum, hogwash, claptrap twaddle. What I found happening is I just sort of adapted my playstyle around this crazy tracking. So in that sense, I guess it just forces you to be more on point with your defensive hardening and roll timing. You kind of just have to assume the enemy will 100% strike you if you don't do something about it. Does that make sense? Final thing for the negatives that I wanted to mention, sometimes an area would throw a lot of tough enemies at you, and I didn't always feel like there was a legitimate incentive to kill them all. And I think the main reason for this is most enemies won't drop anything. And if they do, it's just glimpses and tar, rather than things that would interest me more, like weapons or upgrade materials. So after you max out a shell, there's not much to gain by killing every enemy you come across. I think if you play this game, there will be points where you just run past and avoid everything. Okay, that's all the negatives. I want to get to explain why I played this game, what I was really having fun with, and just the stuff that kept me captivated. First, above all, mystery. The best way I can say this game has mystery baked into the core design. From incomprehensible item descriptions that unravel and become clearer in front of your eyes, meeting strange creatures and NPCs and trying to figure out what they want, all the way to exhilarating exploration moments where you teleport around a level 3 times and then look back and realize, I was just over there a few minutes ago. The point is, often you'll come across a sprinkling of quirky, imaginative mechanisms and situations, like figuring out what purpose the loot has and how to open those weird fish chests. Even much bigger events that I won't go into too much detail here for the sake of keeping the spoilers light, but it happens a few times. Let's just say the entire world can change. The layout alters, enemies are replaced, and backtracking is given a very fresh twist. It's really fun, and I think the game could have even introduced more of these oddities to dabble and play with, and it would have enhanced the enigmatic setting. As I mentioned at the start of the review, you can latch on to the remains of humanity through 4 different shells, which you find as you explore, and they're all located in the Fulgrim hub area near the start, which is great news because these shells will facilitate your different playstyles. I'll just give a speedy introduction. This one's balanced, kind of neutral. This one has really high stamina and mobility with assassin-like shadow evading. This one is a nerd with a lot of resolve. This one has more health points than Midir on New Game Plus 7. The shells aren't purely for gameplay, they actually serve as keys to the story.
I waited as Iove prostrated herself before the altar.
Figuring out these shells and experimenting to see which fits your playstyle best is a very enjoyable experience. This is the way Mortal Shell accomplishes build customization and character classes. To progress your character, you acquire glimpses and tar by defeating enemies and then choosing which abilities you would like to unlock, until eventually you'll have a maxed out shell. No! As well as shells, you'll also be upgrading your weapons, of which there are 5: medium sword, big sword, fiery mace, hammer and chisel, my favourite, and a ballista. To upgrade these, you'll be searching for quenching acid to boost the base damage, offerings to boost the riposte healing effects, and individual key items to enhance your weapons and unlock unique extra abilities. I covered this in my previous Mortal Shell video, but item descriptions are concealed until you use the item enough to gain some familiarity with it, which is a unique system to my mind. I'm not familiar with other games that do this, maybe you can let me know of some, and I think this system is smarter than I initially gave enough credit to, because the fact is, in most action RPGs I've played, I tend to beat them without using any consumables. Probably because I perceive them as scarce, so I don't want to waste them, but then I just end up using none at all, which is just a waste. However, in Mortal Shell, as soon as I picked up something new, I did use it. So in that sense, this game changed my normal gaming habits. To round this section off, as you dig away at this game's systems, you'll figure out what things are and how they work, and this helps to build a fun sense of discovery in Mortal Shell. Let's now approach the delicate topic of combats. I think in my last video I said there was a lack of impact and some floaty animations. Well, I've changed my mind about that. I actually think the hit feedback is good. A lot of the animations are very good as well. Some movesets and boss grab attacks are quite creative in fact. But I was clearly onto something. I realized there were some things off about the combat, but I misjudged what those things were. Let me say, the combat overall is very fluid, precise, strategic, and can be very high stakes depending on which shell you use. It really has depth. You'll find online impressive videos of people pulling off cool combos with weapon swapping, chaining attacks, and so on. Enemy variety is reasonably diverse. A lot have interesting designs, different movement speeds, different attacks. Combat at its best ends up being quite rhythmic as you attack aggressively to build up resolve, then back away by dodging or hardening to avoid counterattacks. Now, when you think of game-changing mechanics of the past that influence future titles, for example, the grappling hook in Sekiro, right? It changed everything. Hardening in Mortal Shell is genuinely at that kind of level. It's my favorite new ability out of everything in Mortal Shell. It doesn't feel like just having a shield or blocking at all. It's so much more than that. I would go as far to say it's an evolution of combat. It's a great tool that can be used defensively, of course, but also offensively. It can even be weaved into your attacks at any time to add delays to your swings. Hardening alone made this game worth my time. It's really a gift that keeps on giving. This brings me to the aforementioned problems I spoke of, and I think it boils down to a combat rhythm that can get repetitive sometimes. For example, take a look at this guy. I literally have to count 6 swings each time before I counterattack. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Some of the enemy movesets are too repetitive for my taste. I'm going to add on to that the lock-on system. It's not always 100% reliable. And then finally, it's not the animations which are the problem. I think it's the aggressive tracking of certain enemies. It's uncanny sometimes. It can catch you off guard and just look a little strange. Plus, the AI is not always fantastic. I realize that's a ton of negatives for combat. I don't want to give the wrong impression here. Combat was fun and satisfying, but it's not perfect. The bosses in Mortal Shell are not terrible. Excluding the minor Grisha bosses, they're mostly unique, they're in keeping with the theme of each area, like this one resides over the fiery Shrine of Ash, this one is in the Frozen Crypt. Overall, good attention to detail there. Now, just a few of them have exciting arenas and unexpected surprises, but generally suffer from repetitive movesets, and overall I have to say, there's just simply not enough. Now that I think about it, I should have actually put this under negatives. There was around 5 main bosses and then a few minor ones, and they weren't bad, but the more I think about it, they don't really make you think. You won't need clever strategies to beat them. Mechanically, there's not much to consider. They're kind of visually appealing cakes with no substance. The boss fights are overall a weak feature in Mortal Shell. I'll give the final boss a pass, okay? It was so atmospheric and gigantic, it was quite unusual. But sorry to say, the rest of the bosses are a letdown. By the end of the game though, I think I was too strong. Once I had a leveled up weapon with a lot of abilities under my belt, I felt almost too powerful. With that being said, I must point out, if you want more of a challenge, you can always up the stakes. You can go all in with the Strange Altar in Fulgrim and abandon every single shell, meaning you continue your playthrough as the weak foundling, always one hit away from death. To mark this brave choice, your character gains a unique black skin. Finally, this brings me to replayability. Mortal Shell ended up taking me around 12 hours to finish, but short things can still be impressive. Right guys? Replayability is a bit of a mixed bag, I would say, because on the one hand, lack of weapons and armor and ways to personalize your character leaves you with few reasons to carry on once you finish the story. Or so you might think. Luckily, there's a robust New Game Plus system to explore, which changes too many things for me to list here. Some of the most notable changes would be hardening doesn't make you completely invincible anymore, weapons can be upgraded to a new max of 10 plus 10, and of course all enemies will do more damage and have more health. I'll tell you, by the end of my first playthrough, I had almost maxed out only one shell and one weapon. So if I wanted to try out the other shells and level them up, New Game Plus would be a perfect option for that. My final rating for Mortal Shell: 8 out of 10. One of my favorites in this genre, and by genre I mean any games which are inspired by the Souls universe.
Your
Souls-like
will make a fine addition to my collection.
I need new things to keep me engaged, and I think that's Mortal Shell's strongest value. I only wish there was more. But that's it, my friends. Normally I just review demos or previews, you know, so this took me forever. Really enjoyed the process though, so no complaints here. Let me know your thoughts on Mortal Shell, unless you haven't even played it, in which case...
You have no power here.